I landed in France. I'm supposed to be in Serbia right now. Here we are. My flight was late. I never made it out to Belgrade. There's my room, right over there. That's it. I'm in Cité de Ville in Paris. And there's this giant white obelisk. What is that? Huge white building. I'm waiting for the band to call me and tell me what's going on. There's my shuttle bus. Take me back to the airport. I'm in this godforsaken land. It's nice weather out here though. There's a gardener. Before the hotels were built, this was probably all farmland. Nice little garden. It's a gigantic Air France building. Huge, takes up the whole landscape. Giant pile of dirt. Yellow dirt, black dirt. Another gigantic one. Well, this is my room. I'm supposed to be in Serbia right now. Hoping to be in Serbia, capturing the band as they got off the plane, but my plane was late. This is my room. This is me not in Serbia. This is me in my room. My little dormitory. This is where I sit. This is where I look out the window. The lovely Holiday Inn. And I practice accordion. Waiting for my flight out this morning, 24 hours later. This is my bed. My TV set. For now. Nice big TV set. Watched a lot of French television on there. My picture. It's crooked. My light fixture. My lamp. My walls, my ceiling. My shades, my desk with my few belongings on it. Not in Serbia. It's so annoying. Well, catch a bus and catch a plane. And I'll meet up with Lane. Finally, Belgrade.
Madame, monsieur, mon nom est Laetitia Corbellini, je suis votre chef de cabine. Le commandant de bord, M. Nuville, et l'ensemble de l'équipage ont le plaisir de vous recevoir à bord de cet Airbus 320 d'Air France, compagnie membre de SkyTeam. Nous sommes désolés de ce départ retardé. Nous nous assurerons de votre sécurité et de votre confort durant ce vol à destination de Belgrade. Les téléphones portables doivent maintenant être éteints et ce jusqu'à l'arrivée à notre point de stationnement. Veuillez attacher et ajuster votre ceinture de sécurité. Au nom d'Air France et de KLM, nous vous souhaitons bon voyage. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
cas d'extinction de la consigne lumineuse. À l'arrivée à notre point de stationnement, nous vous demandons d'ouvrir les coffres à bagages avec précaution afin d'éviter la chute d'objets. Notre personnel au sol a déjà été prévenu de notre arrivée retardée et se tient à votre disposition dans l'aérogare.
Just across the bridge and the first exit there. That's what it sounds like. Across the river bridge. Oh, they got
Sure. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What can I tell you?
Well, let's see here. Man, I gotta fix the sound.
How's everything going with you there?
I think we're about ready. So I was just curious how you got, well, why don't you just tell me what your name is and what you do?
So what my name and do, I'm Lane Harris, and I professionally, currently, I am an executive business coach. I coach people in transformation and business thinking, breakthroughs, what they're doing. Done a lot of different things over my life, but that's the current occupation. And I play the tuba in the Zlatne Uste orchestra.
What is a tuba?
Tuba is a rotary valve flugelhorn, basically a trumpet-like instrument. And I'm one of the people that plays in the melody lead section of the orchestra.
The tuba is basically a trumpet.
Yeah.
What does tuba mean?
Well, I guess literally it translates to tube. But it's pretty much any kind of trumpet-like instrument they refer to as tuba here. Regular trumpet, they'll call it jazz tuba. Mine has a rotary valves on it. And if you're used to Western-style piston-driven brass instruments, this looks like it's played horizontally rather than vertically. I got my horn on my first trip over with the band in 1990. My brother, who's a founding member of the band, Drew Harris, came over a little bit earlier and made connections with people down in Vranja.
When did the band start? And what's the name of the band?
Zlatne Uste is the name of the band. Roughly translates, our intention was to translate it to Golden Lips, but we managed to misspell it in all known languages.
So how do people read it locally?
They're a little confused by it. But the Zlatne Uste is how they would read it.
It's just not spelled right.
It should be Zlatne Ustne to be the translation we wanted, Golden Lips. Uste doesn't translate into anything, I don't think. I don't actually know. I'm not a linguist.
Right.
The Zlatne is golden.
So when was the band formed?
The band formed out of, I guess, the first East Coast Balkan music camp. The Eastern European Folk Life Center put on camps in the West for quite a few years, and then they started an East Coast version of that. And out of that first camp, that was the genesis of the Zlatne Uste Orchestra. at that very time, I was a professional folk dancer in Southern California.
Professional folk dancer. That was your job?
That was my job.
Uh-huh.
I actually did dances from all over the world professionally. I toured with a company, and I did that for 6 or 7 years. I met my wife when we were doing that. That was in 1981. So I don't remember exactly the first year that the band formed, but from the very beginning, because I had my dance roots were from back in the eastern United States, and my brother was a founding member of the band. I got tapes, and at that time we were still working from written sheet music. So Drew would send me these tapes and sheet music to California, and I would play my trumpet that I had at that time, actually cornet, to the Pacific Ocean at night in Santa Monica. And then when the band had parties, I would fly back to New York and sit in with the band and play with the parties. The organization was much looser, and the arrangements were looser than they are now, and I had whatever, that I played what I knew and I didn't play what I didn't know. So I was pretty much welcome every time I showed up. So
Right.
I referred to myself as an adjunct member of the band from the beginning. And in 1990, by that time, I was into another career. I was flying airplanes professionally at that point, and I lived in Seattle. And I was moving into flying a jet for my company, a Learjet, out of New Jersey. But before I moved to New Jersey, they had this trip scheduled to play at the Gucha Festival. And I flew over here on my own and joined the band as an adjunct member, anticipating that I would be a full-time member within a few months. And that was my first trip over in 1990.
So 1990 was your first trip over here?
Yeah, I first trip to Europe at all. In fact, it's about the only place I've ever been in, like, Europe proper, is here to Serbia.
Mm-hmm.
This is my third trip. No.
Mm-hmm. So when you say you flew over, you didn't fly an airplane.
No, I didn't fly my own plane.
Commercial jet.
At that time, it was still Yugoslavia, and it was still a communist country. And the band had arranged to. They had flights on yacht from New York, I believe. I think they flew yacht the whole way. And yacht was, I believe they were a sponsor of the festival. Politico, the national paper, was a sponsor. And the connection for us being invited as guests to that festival came through Politico.
And that was the Gucha Festival.
That was the Gucha Festival. And the Gucha Festival was the final competition to name the best brass band and the best players of the year. And it's grown and grown and grown. I got a flight from Swiss Air from Seattle, and good food, big seats, and wonderful flight over. And I met up with them over here.
Uh-huh. So what was that first festival like for you?
It was very exciting, and I had some idea what to expect because the band had been over twice before, just a few years before, so they had greased the skid, so to speak. Mm-hmm. One of the things that worked really well for me to help make it magical and otherwise that first trip was I came over a few days early and met my brother here. Mm-hmm. And we had gone down into Vranja, and I got to meet some of the musicians down there, and that's where I bought my horn, was from Ekrem Amontovic, who's now known as Ekrem Mladenovic. And he actually won the competition that year.
Oh.
And he's I don't know how many generations down from the Bakić Bakić Orchestra. He was the family leader of this family Roma band. Mm-hmm. So I got to meet them, and in the process of meeting them, I became really present to the amazing connection that the band had made with the musicians. and it's particularly the Roma musicians in the earlier trips.
So that spoke to you. You liked it.
It spoke to me. It really touched me. Still, to this moment, it does. And making that connection before the festival, though, meant when I got to the festival, I already knew some of these people. So I was already connected very intimately inside some of the real movers and shakers of the music before the festival ever started for me. It was a different festival than the one 2 years ago, which was after the war. That was 2003. We're now in 2005. There was in 1990 when we were there, you could tell that the war was on its way. It was you could smell the cordate already. So there was a little bit of depression about that for me. And
how could you tell the war was on its way?
The way people talked. There were people that would literally set up on a soapbox or something in the bus station and gather people around and have discussions. And not being a linguist, I don't get the details of it, but you could certainly get the general drift of the whole thing.
Right.
And the papers and there was a tension about it.
Right.
That was there, and not knowing details about how the war would go, but knowing that it was going to be driven along ethnic and religious lines, it gave us concern, particularly for our Roma friends. And it's a little like maybe being on a runaway train.
Right.
No good is going to come of this, and there's not much you can do about it. And we don't have to live through it. We were going home in a few days.
Right. Were your friends talking about it?
No, not much. My American friends, we talked about it a lot,
Right.
and we got what translations we could from that. But no, we never had discussions, or I didn't have any discussions in or around with the Roma or anyone else for that matter.
So who had arranged this trip to Gucci?
I don't know who had put all the details together on that trip, since I was, I had to make my own itinerary to hook up with them. But we've always been invited guests from the festival to come there. My understanding of the first trip, my brother had mentioned that we should go to this festival. It would be a hoot to go, and the general reaction, I think, when the band was, well, like, that'll never happen. It's a wannabe American band going over to play running with the big dogs and all that, and his general response sort of was, well, we won't know unless we ask. Started making some inquiries around, and like, who should I talk to about it? And they got hold of the U.S. liaison reporter for Politico. And as soon as he heard about it, he said, oh, they'll love you. We'll make it happen. And they made it happen. And the beauty of that, in the communist days of that, is it pretty much took a phone call to make it happen.
Really, just one phone call in the communist days?
Well, it's kind of, the Politico sponsored the festival. And they would call up Yacht and say, we need to get 12 or 14 people over on standby, get them seats, and call up the bus and say, we need to have a bus to take these people down to Gucci. And they arranged housing for us in Gucci. And the way the festival's set up, all the performers are fed there anyway. They have this cantina kitchen that goes all the time and feeds the performers. So we went, and this time around was very similar. In that it was, once we decided we were going and people were aligned that we were going, arrangements were made for us. And I don't know who made all of those arrangements.
But you decided to go, and you arrived. And so because you arrived separately, you flew into the airport.
Yes.
And then
my brother picked me
your
up.
brother picked you up. So tell me about your impressions of the country when you first got here. What you saw, what you felt. I mean, you said it was your first trip to Europe, right?
Yeah. Well, I loved it. I loved it to start with. My brother spoke a little bit of Serbian. I suspect he spoke less than I thought he spoke, but it was sufficient. Significantly more than I spoke. So he already had the car, and it was relatively easy to get through customs. I had no idea what to expect, but it was pretty easy getting in. And then we started driving through, and I was just amazed at the countryside. You're probably picking up some of that now. It was very similar to this, a gorgeous day. We went through a couple little rain showers, but everything was so green. It's not in sight at the moment, but these characteristic red tile roofs are just like a signature to me of this part of the world. They're everywhere. The beauty of it just struck me as amazing. The people that we met were almost universally wonderful, patient with us. There was not very much English spoken in 1990. You didn't find people speaking English. Now, everybody's English is way better than whatever Serbian I've got now. That'll change as we go further south, but around Belgrade, I've been amazed at the graffitis in English. It's very easy to find something in English here. So it's very easy to get around that way.
So you drove south for about 3 or 4 hours, got to Gucha.
Well, the first trip we went to Vranja first.
And then you spent the time with
We
the
spent
musicians.
some time down there, and then we drove back up to Gucha for the festival.
So when you got to Vranja, what happened?
Well, we wandered around and found where we were going.
Where were you going?
We had sort of an appointment to meet with this Ekrem Mamontovic, who's now Mladenovic. He's changed his name from Muslim to Christian name, and our intention was to buy an instrument or more from him, and we did. I'm to this day playing one of his horns that he won festivals with.
Did you have a tuba before that, or
No,
you were
I had a
trumpet?
cornet at that time, a trumpet.
An American trumpet.
Trumpet, yes. From the first trips, we didn't know what they played over here. We thought it was a trumpet, but none of us had that. The first trip they came over, that's when the band bought instruments that were appropriate for the music. So I was going to buy my horn there, and we did. When we got there, they were just having their last rehearsal before going off to the festival.
So you arrive in town, and an hour or two later, you see them rehearsing.
Yeah, and the way you find someone like that, especially in the Roma quarters, it's not so easy to track down addresses or something, but everybody knows everyone. So we drove into Vranja, we looked for a dark-skinned person, stopped them and asked them directions to where the Roma live. And they would direct us. The second person that got us started, and the second time we stopped a dark-skinned person, asked them that, they got in the car with us and said, "I'll take you." And they just drove us up there. And then when we got up into the area, we started asking for where is Ekrem's home. And because he's such a prominent musician, they knew where he lived, and they took us right to his house, which was a real production. He has about a 3-story house that was under construction. So they get enough money and they build as much house as they can, anticipating how much house they will have. And then as they get more money, they build more house and finish more house. And we haggled about the instruments. He told us what he wanted for the price, and we tried to get him down. He had 3 that he was willing to sell. We ended up buying 2. We tried to buy all 3 he wasn't going to move on his price at all. Just wasn't going to change his price. I think it was about $300 a horn, and we could pick any one of them. It didn't matter, but $300 for a horn.
Were all 3 horns golden lips?
They were all trubas. One of them was actually a prize horn from Gucha. It's one, if you win the first prize, they give you a horn, and one of those was one of those horns. And that's not the one I have. I chose a different one, but we bought that one. We bought 2, but
Who's playing the prize horn now?
My brother has that one. It's not a very good horn. It was a prize horn, but it's not a very good horn. It's more of a trophy than an instrument. And once we bought the horns, though, the method of payment was quite flexible. So we paid him in a combination of dinars and dollars, and something else, maybe a traveler's check. I don't remember all of the, but we ended up actually getting it for a little less of my cost because of the way that we ended up paying him. And it was very confusing at that time. There were 3 different generations of currency in play at once that year in Yugoslavia. So you could have these older dinar notes, 100,000 dinar notes that were almost worthless. And then there were others where, 100 dinars was actually could buy you something. So it was incredibly confusing to me to buy anything, and the people were all amused by it. You would go into the market and they would start to give you a price, and you don't understand it very well at first, so you just sort of hold out, fan out some money in front, and they would reach in and take what they wanted. and then they try to explain it to you.
So did Ekram have any idea who you were?
Yes, he knew my brother from previous trips over and stuff, so he never met me.
Right.
And it was a bit of a homecoming last year, coming back in 2003, that his son won the competition, Mladenovic. And the father's now, the old man's playing back up to his son now.
Uh-huh.
So this is a 3rd or 4th generation of this family in this orchestra.
So, the rehearsal happened first, right? When you got to town?
Yeah.
Where were they rehearsing?
In Ekram's yard, in his yard.
How many musicians were there?
About 10. I don't remember exactly. About 10. I can remember them admonishing the tuba player and one of the baritone players about having to polish their instrument that night and giving them polish and rags, and don't show up without it being shiny. One of the things that was, I don't know how unique it is to them, but even then, and the last 2 years ago when we were here, that orchestra has a coach or a conductor who's a local music teacher, I believe, but he's not a member of the band, but he comes over and literally shapes their sound when he directs them, and he arranges the music for them, and he's very interesting to watch him when he moves. He literally shapes the sound as a conductor in front of the band, and they won. I don't know that the other bands have someone like that to have an external set of ears. And if I'm not mistaken, he's a Slavic guy too, so he's probably more in touch with what the judges are listening for than what some of the Roma are.
So was this man there 10 years ago in 1990?
Yes, he was. I think it was the same guy. I don't remember that detail, but they had someone there external to the band directing them in 90 and then in 2003 also, and they won both years.
So what was your experience like when you came to this foreign country, first time in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
and you drive south and you end up in this man's yard?
Yeah, well, after we bought the horns, now he was going to feed us. He put us up for the night. We had a rental car, a brand new Camry, that was a very trick car from Yugoslavia in 1990. And in the Roma quarters, it was, it really stood out. It's part of how we made points. We took some of the young Roma boys for rides in the car around the neighborhood, and they got to show off to their friends that they were buddies with the Amerikanska. But when we stayed the night, he actually had them take the car and put it in his yard and had some of his family sleep in the car to make sure that nothing happened to it, that it would be there in the morning with all of its parts. And we ferried them down to the bus station. We assisted them in their departure for then before we started off on our own trip.
So they were literally leaving the next day.
Yes, the next morning.
The next morning for the festival.
For the festival, and we were going to meet them later there.
So how did you feel hearing this music? I mean, it must have been very exciting.
It was very exciting to actually, have music on the hoof. It was amazing. And my first experience with a live band was in Ekrem's yard, listening to him play.
Right.
I'd heard plenty of tapes and CDs, and I'd played with the band, but I had not had that full frontal experience of a brass band playing for you.
Where did you stand in relation to the band?
We were right in front of them, right behind the conductor.
Must have been smiling.
Oh, yeah, I was smiling. I was just, it's a physical experience to be in front of a band like that.
Tell me about that.
That has an impact, to have 10 or 12 of these horns and 2 drummers. It has it's kind of like being up close and personal to fireworks. You can physically feel it, not just hear it. And later when we got to the festival, you added the other components besides seeing them, hearing them, and feeling that the power and force of the band. There was also, at least in 1990, there was a smell that came with the whole festival of roasting meat, boiling cabbage, beer, Slivovitz. It was the nature of a festival at those days. The competition was the reason for the festival, and that was a Sunday night. But Friday, Saturday, there was all of this music with the musicians and the different bands wandering around the town square. Pretty much everything happened in the town square except the competition on Sunday afternoon, which was in a soccer field on a stage. And the town square is filled up with these different tents that have been converted into basically restaurants, tavernas, kafana type operations, with waiters, and each one would have a sawhorse and table, boards over it with a tablecloth over it with Slivovitz, maybe some other whiskeys. There weren't nearly as many types of beer available in those days as there are now. And again, it was communist, so there was only a couple of different kinds of beer to be had.
What kind of food would be on the table?
And typically in the food would be roast pork, roast lamb. There's a boiled cabbage, kupus, that they make that has meat in it and other vegetables, but cooked in these big clay pots with open fires pushed up around the clay pots. So you have these fires going all around, and meat cooking, and people drinking. And
had you ever seen anything like that?
no, not the closest I'd seen to things like that were Greek festivals that I'd been to in the United States, where they'd have lambs roasting on a spit, and it's similar, but more American, gentrified kind of thing. We had some wonderful, wonderful experiences playing at that festival in '90.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Do you think that the competition is just an excuse to get together for the weekend and have a good time, or
Definitely.
was the competition the main thing?
The competition was the draw, but it was a major excuse for a party to celebrate this particular combination of brass band music. There are brass bands around in Macedonia, in Bulgaria, and of course other parts of the world. But this particular combination of it is somewhat unique to this Serbia.
What is that combination?
Well, that has the rotary valve flugelhorns, the truba. There'll be usually three or four baritone horns, helicon, which is sort of like a sousaphone. Technically, there's a little difference, but it looks like a sousaphone, and one or two drummers. And the type of music they play. So there's a kind of a characteristic piece of this. So there's a certain amount of nationalistic pride and a celebration of all things Serbia about the festival. And of course, leading up to this, there was ever so much more so of that. At least that was my impression of it.
So you would say that this music is pretty unique to Serbia, though this style. I mean, not necessarily brass band music, but this style of brass band.
This particular style, yeah. And now there are close types of that in Macedonia and Bulgaria as well. But this Serbian brass band does have a kind of a signature piece about it.
How does it sound different to you? Or how would you describe it? Is it faster, different meters, or is it just maybe the instrumentation?
Most of what we experienced, it's fairly fast. Some of it quite fast. The rhythms that they play in, particularly the Roma bands, there's more syncopation, there are more odd rhythms, sevens or nines. The way that they phrase the music is different than, particularly to Western music. There are also different scales that they play in. They don't just play, white keys on the piano kind of scales. But the drive and the rhythm are pretty unique. Another piece, the typical format of a tune or a song is there is a melody that's arranged, composed, and there may be multiple, A part, B part, C part, or more to those. And then they'll go into a rhythmical vamp, generally with one chord, and the lead tuba player, trumpet player will then play a solo over that very rhythmical, hard driving one chord vamp that goes on. So it's not like a blues improvisation or something where the chord pattern continues to happen and you lay down the solo over it. You just have this intense rhythm, and often the solo is arrhythmical, or it certainly doesn't sync up with the driving rhythm underneath it, so it kind of floats over the top of it. And then they'll come back in and play through one or more of the melodies to go up to end the tune. The typical format that I remembered in those days, the bands would go from table to table and be hired by the table to play for the table. So you would have a family or friends and grouping that might have 4 to 12, 15 people if you had a couple of tables together. And they would hire a band to come and play for them. And they would pay them to show up and play a tune, and then they would pay them for each song after that, often requesting what song they want to hear. And maybe directing them. We want it slower, we want it faster. And that's not the tune I wanted, I want another tune. And the bands would play for tips. Because there's a pretty good bit of money involved in this, especially for the Roma bands, it's a pretty big deal to just get to Gucha. There's a certain dynamic that goes on later in the night on Saturday night that the better bands start going to bed because they're competing for the prizes and the glory and the recording time and whatever else they manage to get by winning the festival. Those who know that they're really not going to win will milk Saturday night for all they can get out of it to make as much money as possible.
So they stay up all night.
Yes, and they go table to table to table to table throughout. And there was very little, I don't even remember any recorded music being played in that 1990. Other than in the afternoon, there was like a public address system that was strung up, kind of like the speakers you see in the old TV series MASH with Radar O'Reilly on it. With this, they kind of float in some music there in the afternoon. But there wasn't any, it was all live. And it was this cacophonous, 3 bands going within 100 feet of you. And I made a recording as I just walked through the square and coming in and out of the one band's range and another band's range and back and forth. And we got inspired to go out and join this, and we went table to table playing, and we ended up at one of the tables where some of the sponsors of the festival were, and they treated us very royally. We got very special treatment, and one of the things I remember, it was a couple of outstanding things in that particular instance there. One was when they came out and tipped Michael to play a song with a $100 bill. That here in the heart of Serbia, they brought out a Ben Franklin and stuck it on his head to play us a tune.
Wow.
And there's many people spend a lot of money on the music at this festival in those days. And some of them, you got the sense this was probably their lunch money they were spending. But these people, we were confident this was not their lunch money. They could afford to pay us whatever they paid us, and we could enjoy playing for them without feeling guilty about whether their kids are eating or not.
Well, one thing that someone explained to me in Bulgaria, this musician was telling you, was that there weren't a lot of outlets for entertainment. For, if you had a little extra money, this is how you wanted to spend it. Musicians having music and drink and food was really the way that people entertained themselves during the communist era. Because there weren't a lot of movies or books or, other forms of entertainment.
Definitely, I had that sense and experience when I was here. Their relationship to music was very, very different. They listen with an intensity that I've almost never seen in Americans. They really have an active listening. So when you play for them, it elicits something out of your playing that's very different. It's not like I just go in and play whatever it is that I play. When I play, there's an interaction with the listening here in Serbia that draws something out of me that is mostly not the case playing for Americans, unless they've had some serious exposure to this and have taken on that way of listening. So that was the other piece, particularly in the Roma, but for other people too. There's any important milestone event in someone's life calls for music and celebration here.
So what kind of milestones would those be?
That would marriages, of course, housewarmings. If you buy a house and invite your friends over, you would have a band to play for that. When young men enter the Army, they would have a going away party for them, and you need a band for playing that. Anything like that, birth of a child, you would, christening, you would have a band to play for that. So they have and they certainly are, have recordings and stuff here. But the sense I had, at least at that time, was there wasn't a star system like in the United States, where you have the radio record music machine that runs and creates, your Madonnas or your Bruce Springsteen or whatever. That there's a lot more space for working musicians to make a decent living here. And in the Roma communities, often the musicians are some of the best paid people in their community. So they're pretty respected, and being a musician is a pretty respectable trade. And often it's a family venture.
Right.
And certainly not all of the bands are family bands, but many of them are. They're quite multi-generational.
Just let me know if you want to break at any point.
Whatever.
Okay. Well, when you got there, which you said you had many wonderful experiences. You mentioned Michael's.
Well, the $100 bill tip was a pretty. That was, we had gotten little tips, playing folk dancing in America. And they were usually $1, or if somebody would throw 5 $1 bills at you or something. And here these guys were, like, every song they were paying us, $20, $50, this $100 bill. At one point, they'd ask for some song, and they were, I don't know, they may have actually been running out of change, but they took out the American Express card and then tried to stick it on Michael's head. They threw their dishes up on top of the tent. They were there all week. Over the 3 or 4 days, these dishes were still up on top of the tent.
Did people camp out?
Yes, they do. At that time, there was one hotel in town, and there were thousands and thousands of people showing up for the event. People camped out in the woods and out by the stream, the river there.
Or maybe they just don't sleep for 5 days.
Sleep is not a high priority for anybody that comes to this festival. Not at all. But we also, later in the evening, we had a couple of the tenor players from another Roma band just attached themselves to us, and their lead players had gone to bed or something, I don't know. And it was an interesting experience playing with them. They were incredibly powerful players. And of course they knew way more music than we knew. But when the tips came, they went into their pocket real quick. They weren't sharing that part with us. But we weren't in it for the money.
Right.
But that night
you probably didn't realize you were going to make money.
Yeah, and that night when we went to put our horns up, we were kind of exhausted, and we were like, oh wow, and we counted up the money, and we had 3 or 4 different currencies. We had the dollar, the $100 bill, maybe some other dollars. We had Deutschmarks, we had francs, and we had dinars. And we sort of guessed at the exchange rate, but we made almost $1,000 in tips that night. And we'd only played we couldn't play more than an hour and a half. We just didn't have the chops for it.
Wow. Wow, and that was probably a big surprise.
Yeah, it was interesting. I actually have a little film of us doing that, a video of that if you want to look at, I'd be happy to share it with you. A little debrief there at the end of that night.
Video of you guys, talking.
Hanging out after counting the money and, sort of debriefing with ourselves before we went our separate ways back out into the crowd to be participants rather than musicians.
So did you were invited to compete, I guess?
Not compete, no. We've never competed. We've been invited guest. Special guest. Honored special guest. And we are pretty good as a band, but we're not in the league with these guys. They're we're good AAA ball players, but we're not. The Yankees aren't coming to sign us up.
Major league.
Yeah.
Right.
And at the end of the competition, the Sunday night after it was all over, there's general mayhem and festivities and people going crazy, and we decided we wanted to have a band come and play for our table. And so my brother went off to get us a band, and he came back with Slobodan Saljevich. Now I still don't have all the details about all the different prizes, but Ekrem, I think, had won the first trumpet player thing, but Slobodan Saljevich's band had won first band, I believe. I forget which way that went, whether Slobodan was the best trumpet, but he won a top prize there. And remember my brother showing up there, kind of shrugging his shoulders. It's the best I could do.
Tell me about Slobodan.
Slobodan in 1990 was very influential to me personally as a musician. And I bought my horn from Ekrem, who is this at least second, if not a third generation of this band, very top, highly respected band. But Ekrem doesn't have a lot of Elvis in him. He's a player, but he's a maestro on the instrument kind of thing. But personality-wise, he's a bit of a cold fish. Doesn't have a lot of presence on stage. Lord, he can play the horn, but Slobodan, however, in 1990 was this young buck, tended to dress in a white suit.
Was he known in
Oh yeah.
Serbia?
Oh yeah, he was known. He's definitely known. You don't get to that level in the festival without being known around. He didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
And it was a multi-generational band. His father was there, who managed the band. He was this very cute, small little Roma guy.
How old was he then?
It's hard to tell, but I'm going to guess he was. I guess he was in his 60s. The Roma's difficult, and musicians have it may be one of the better lives and better paid, but I think of it as being somewhat of a hard life. You're blowing all the time. These guys can play 8 and 9 hours a day. It's unbelievable the way they play.
And they must probably play 8, 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
And you go to certain festivals or weddings or something like that.
And weddings can be multi-day affairs with bands coming and going at different times, and they can play more than one a day. And these working musicians, they really work. But the father's very cute, and he's very entertaining, and he managed the band. And his brother played with him, his younger brother, but Slobodan had a presence about him. He was a very good-looking guy. He dressed in white suits, sometimes, not always. And he would also play with a silver instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody else is playing brass, and his band is playing with silver instruments. He had a charisma about him, and playing very popular tunes. So that's what and then when he came to play for us that last night, it was very, very special. His horn right in my face playing for me.
What did he play?
One of his signature pieces that he played then was a tune called Ancho Chuvar. And it's a very special tune for me. It's one that I actually play for the band now. My brother had some tunes that were sort of like his signature pieces in the band, and that was one of them. And he and I used to play it together. And then he moved to Virginia, so he geographically couldn't be with the band anymore. And because we're so highly arranged and so much more professional than we were, it's very difficult to be an adjunct member of the band like it was in the early 80s. So I've adopted a couple of his tunes that are some of the few tunes that I actually play a lead solo role in.
Right.